Some places do not look made for human life. Too steep, too remote, too unforgiving. And yet, people stayed. They carved roads into cliffs, built homes in stone, raised sanctuaries above valleys, and made daily life possible where the world seems to offer no room at all. From a distance, these places feel unreal. But for the people who live there, they are not wonders. They are home. In this documentary, we travel to the far edges of the habitable world, to places shaped by danger, faith, isolation, and endurance. And at every stop, we find the same quiet truth. Human beings have always had a way of remaining where the world seems to say they should not. Yunnan's Road on the Abyss, China. The first thing you notice is how little stands between a human life and empty space. A few planks, a wall of rock, a path so narrow it seems less built than borrowed from the mountain itself. And somehow, for generations, that was enough. In the highlands of southwestern China, routes like these were once part of ordinary life. In Yunnan, some of them belonged to the old Tea-Horse Road, the vast mountain trade network that carried goods through some of the hardest terrain in Asia. On certain surviving sections, the trail runs directly along the cliff, with rough wooden beams and ladder-like supports set into stone, and nothing below but open air. What looks to us like an impossible passage was, for many people, simply the road ahead. That is what gives this place its power. Not only the danger, but the familiarity of it. To an outsider, a path like this feels like a place you would cross once and never forget. For the people who lived here, it could mean something far less dramatic and far more important. The way to the next settlement, the way to trade, the way to carry food, supplies, and the weight of daily life across the mountains. Fear did not disappear. It simply had to make room for necessity. And maybe that is the deeper truth of Yunnan. A road is not always just a connection. Sometimes it is a test. A narrow strip between rock and depth, asking for balance, patience, and nerve. Places like this remind us that home is not always built where the world is gentle. Sometimes it begins where every step demands focus. In Yunnan, even the road itself becomes a form of courage. Kalavantin, Durg, India. Some places do not feel like destinations. They feel like challenges waiting in stone. Kalavantin, Durg, rising above the hills of Maharashtra, has exactly that effect. Long before you reach the top, the mountain makes its terms clear. A steep staircase carved directly into rock climbs toward the summit, often without railings, without protection, and without much forgiveness for hesitation. With every step, the drop becomes harder to ignore, and the height stops feeling like scenery and starts feeling personal. That is what makes this place so striking. Not grandeur, not comfort, but exposure. Kalavantin does not impress by welcoming you, it impresses by refusing to. The rock feels raw, almost untouched, as if the mountain never truly opened itself to human beings and people came anyway. And still, someone carved steps here. Someone made a route upward. Someone decided that even a place this severe could be climbed, used, and remembered. Today, many people come for the thrill, the view, the danger, the image of standing high above the landscape with clouds moving past the ridge. But places like this carry an older meaning too. Heights were not always sought for beauty. Often they were valued for protection, for visibility, for the advantage that elevation gave in a harder world. And maybe that is why Kalavantin Durg stays with people. Because it strips the experience down to something elemental. No shortcuts, no ease, no illusion that the mountain will adjust to you. There is only stone, wind, height, and the next careful step. After Yunnan's cliffside paths, this journey reaches another edge of the human world. But here, the feeling is even sharper. The mountain does not merely test endurance, it tests composure. And in that sense, Kalavantin Durg is more than a dramatic climb. It is a reminder that some of the most unforgettable places on earth do not offer comfort first. They ask whether you are steady enough to continue.
Paro Taktsang, Bhutan.
After the raw exposure of Kalavantin Durg, the mood changes here. The danger is still present. The height is still real. The cliff is still unforgiving. But now, the climb carries another meaning. High above Bhutan's Paro Valley, clinging to an almost vertical rock face, stands Paro Taktsang, the Tiger's Nest Monastery. From a distance, it hardly looks built at all. It looks imagined, a white and gold structure suspended between stone, mist, and sky, as if the mountain had briefly opened a place for prayer and then sealed itself around it again. The path leading there is steep, narrow, and demanding, and with every turn, the world below begins to fall away. Prayer flags move in the wind. Water slips down the rock in thin streams. And somewhere between effort and silence, the monastery comes into view. What makes this place so powerful is not only where it stands, but why. According to Bhutanese tradition, Guru Rinpoche, also known as Padmasambhava, is said to have arrived here in the 8th century on the back of a tigress, meditating in the cave that later made this one of the holiest sites in Bhutan. Whether one approaches that story through faith or through history, the effect is the same. Paro Taktsang does not feel like a place chosen for convenience. It feels chosen for meaning. And that matters, because for many people, the journey here is not separate from the destination. It is part of it. The climb slows the body, sharpens attention, and creates distance from ordinary life below. By the time you reach the monastery, you have not simply arrived somewhere high. You have entered a different frame of mind. That may be the deeper force of places like this. They remind us that human beings do not only go to difficult places out of necessity. Sometimes we go because hardship gives a place gravity, because effort changes perception, because a sacred site built on an easy road would not mean quite the same thing. So after Yunnan's cliff paths and Kalavantin's carved stone steps, Paro Taktsang reveals another truth about the edges of the human world. Sometimes the highest and hardest places are not where people survive. They are where people seek significance.
Petra, Jordan.
Some places do not look built. They look revealed. Petra, hidden deep within the red rock landscape of southern Jordan, has that effect almost immediately. You do not simply arrive there in the ordinary sense. You move toward it through narrow stone passageways and shadowed canyon walls, and then, almost all at once, the rock begins to look less like landscape and more like memory. Facades, tombs, and monumental structures appear as if they had not been constructed against the mountain, but drawn out of it. The stone and the architecture share the same color, the same texture, the same silence. It feels less like a city placed in the desert than a city the desert agreed to keep. That is part of Petra's power. It does not present itself like a ruin in the usual way. It feels preserved inside the landscape, almost hidden in time.
The shifting light, the narrow approach, the sudden scale of the carved facades. All of it creates the sense that this is not merely a historic site, but a place that still remembers what it once was. And what it once was mattered enormously. For the people who lived here, Petra was not a spectacle. It was a center of trade, movement, and exchange, positioned between desert, mountain, and caravan routes. That may be what makes it so remarkable even now. In such a severe environment, human imagination did not retreat. It expanded. Instead of resisting the rock, it worked with it. Instead of building over the landscape, it entered into it. After the monasteries, sacred cliffs, and isolated heights we have already seen, Petra shifts the meaning of this journey once again. Here, the question is no longer only how people endure difficult places. It is how they transform them. Because Petra reminds us that the most extraordinary human settlements are not always the ones that conquer the land. Sometimes they are the ones that become part of it.
Taos Pueblo, USA. Not every extraordinary place stands on the edge of a cliff. Some stand quietly in the landscape and endure so long that silence becomes part of their power. Taos Pueblo in northern New Mexico is one of those places. At first glance, it can seem simple. Multi-story adobe dwellings shaped from earth, water, and timber, set beneath a wide sky and backed by the long memory of the American Southwest. But that simplicity is deceptive. This is one of the oldest continuously inhabited communities in North America, a place where people have lived for more than 1,000 years in the landscape defined by heat, cold, dryness, and distance. What makes Taos Pueblo so remarkable is not danger in the obvious sense. It is continuity. After cliff roads, volcanic islands, and sacred heights, this place introduces a different kind of human achievement: the ability to remain. The architecture here was not designed to impress the outside world. It was shaped by generations of lived knowledge. Thick earthen walls help hold warmth during cold seasons and reduce heat during the hotter months. Small openings protect the interior from harsh conditions. The clustered form of the settlement creates not just shelter, but closeness, a way of living together in a land that can otherwise feel wide, exposed, and unforgiving. And that is what gives Taos Pueblo its weight. To outsiders, it may appear calm, even modest. But places like this remind us that endurance is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is built one season at a time, one generation after another, through memory, restraint, and adaptation. There is no spectacle in that, at least not at first. Yet the longer you look, the more extraordinary it becomes. Because survival is not always about defying the landscape. Sometimes it is about understanding it so deeply that your way of life begins to move with it. That may be the deeper meaning of Taos Pueblo. It shows that home does not have to be carved from danger to be remarkable. Sometimes its greatness lies in patience and the quiet intelligence required to live with a place for centuries and still remain rooted there. In a journey filled with the improbable, Taos Pueblo offers something just as powerful: proof that endurance can be as awe-inspiring as risk.
Coober, Pedy, Australia.
If Taos Pueblo showed us a place shaped by patience above the ground, Coober Pedy reveals what happens when survival moves below it. In the middle of Australia's outback, where summer temperatures regularly climb past 100 degrees Fahrenheit, daily life did not adapt by reaching higher or building grander. It adapted by going underground. Coober Pedy, famous as the country's opal capital, is known for its dugouts, homes, hotels, shops, and even churches carved directly into the earth. What sounds unusual from the outside became here
the most practical form of ordinary life. That is what makes this place so striking. Not just its harsh setting, but the calm logic behind the response to it. Above ground, the landscape can feel almost lunar, flat, dusty, sun-blasted, and exposed. But behind a door cut into rock, an entirely different world begins. The earth becomes insulation, shelter, and climate control all at once. In a place where heat can dominate the day, the ground offers steadiness. The solution is not glamorous, but it is intelligent in the purest sense. A way of living that does not try to defeat the environment, only to work with its limits. And that may be the deeper power of Coober Pedy. It reminds us that adaptation is not always visible from a distance. Sometimes the most human response to an extreme landscape is not to stand against it, but to disappear into it a little, to let the land become wall, roof, and refuge. After Taos Pueblo, where endurance took shape above ground through tradition, climate, and continuity, Coober Pedy offers a very different answer to the same challenge. When a place becomes too harsh for ordinary life on the surface, people sometimes find a way to live not above the hardship, but within it. To outsiders, Coober Pedy can look surreal, almost like a settlement on another planet. But for the people who call it home, it is not an oddity. It is routine. It is heat, answered with ingenuity. Isolation, answered with endurance. And in that sense, it belongs perfectly in this journey. Because some of the most remarkable places on Earth are not the ones where people conquered the landscape. They are the ones where people learned how to let the landscape shelter them.
Aogashima, Japan. After the underground logic of Coober Pedy, this journey turns outward again, and farther away. Far out in the Pacific, south of Tokyo, Aogashima does not look like a village in any ordinary sense. It looks like a geological accident that human beings somehow refused to leave. The island is small, isolated, and shaped by a rare double caldera, a crater within a crater, the result of powerful volcanic activity that once destroyed nearly everything here. The eruptions of the late 18th century forced people off the island for years, and yet in time, they came back. That return is what gives Aogashima its emotional weight. Because the drama of this place is not only in its cliffs, its volcanic heat, or the wide emptiness of the ocean around it. It is in the fact that people chose to build a life again on ground that had already reminded them how unstable it could be. To most outsiders, that feels almost unimaginable. We tend to think of home as something solid, something dependable. Aogashima offers a different idea. Home as a negotiation with uncertainty. Everything about the island reinforces that feeling. The sea does not merely surround it, it separates it. The cliffs do not simply frame the settlement, they confine it. And the volcanic landscape never fully lets you forget what made it. Even when life appears calm, the island carries the memory of fire beneath the surface. But perhaps that is exactly why Aogashima matters. It reminds us that human beings do not only adapt to difficult places, sometimes they return to them. Sometimes belonging runs deeper than fear. What once destroyed a community does not always erase its bond to the land. In some cases, it makes that bond even stranger, quieter, and stronger. After cliffside roads, sacred mountains, desert settlements, and underground homes, Aogashima reveals another form of endurance. Not survival on a path, not protection inside stone, but the decision to remain on an island where the earth itself has a history of eruption. And maybe that is the deeper truth here. Some places do not become remarkable because they are safe. They become remarkable because people keep finding reasons to call them home.
Kandovan, Iran. Some places do not look built at all. They look as if the earth rose first, and human life quietly moved inside it later. Kandovan, in northwestern Iran on the slopes of Mount Sahand, has exactly that feeling. Instead of ordinary houses, there are tall, cone-shaped rock formations hollowed into homes, rooms, stairways, and windows. The village is still inhabited, and that matters because Kandovan does not feel like a monument to a vanished way of life. It feels lived in. The stone is not only scenery here, it is shelter. What makes the place so striking is not only its appearance, though that alone is unforgettable. The rock formations were shaped by volcanic material from Sahand, and later carved by generations of residents into what are often called Karan dwellings. From a distance, the village can look almost unreal. Part beehive, part cliff, part memory. But once you understand how it works, the beauty becomes practical. Thick stone walls help keep the interiors cooler in summer and warmer in winter, turning the mountain itself into a kind of natural insulation. And that may be the deeper power of Kandovan. It shows a form of human adaptation that feels less like conquest than cooperation. In many extreme places, people survive by resisting the landscape. Here, they survived by entering it, by letting the rock dictate the shape of the home, by accepting that the mountain was not an obstacle to build around, but a structure to build within. After Aogashima, where people returned to a volcanic island marked by eruption, Kandovan gives us another version of the same truth. Human beings do not always respond to harsh terrain by moving away from it. Sometimes they study it, settle into it, and slowly let it become part of daily life. Because in Kandovan, survival is not written against nature. It is written into the stone itself.
Santuario de las Lajas, Colombia. Before you understand what this place means, you see where it stands. A bridge reaches across a narrow gorge in southern Colombia, and from the rock beyond it, the sanctuary rises almost impossibly. Part church, part cliff, part apparition. Gothic towers lift above the ravine, mist gathers in the cut of the valley, and water moves far below. Nothing about the setting feels accidental. Even from a distance, Las Lajas seems set apart from ordinary life. That is what makes it so powerful. Not only the beauty of the structure, but the way the landscape prepares you for it. The depth of the gorge matters. The isolation matters. Long before you learn the story, the place already feels like somewhere people would come not just to see, but to seek. According to tradition, this became a sacred site after an appearance of the Virgin Mary to an indigenous woman and her child in the 18th century. Since then, pilgrims have come here not simply to admire the church, but to approach something they believe the place still holds. In that sense, Las Lajas is not powerful only as architecture. It is powerful as devotion made visible. For many who come here, the approach is part of the meaning. The descent into the gorge, the crossing of the bridge, the upward view toward the sanctuary. All of it creates the feeling of leaving the everyday world behind. The landscape does not merely surround the church. It helps give the church its emotional force. After Kondovan's stone dwellings and Aogashima's volcanic isolation, this journey changes again. Here, remoteness is no longer only about survival. It becomes something intentionally sought out, a distance that deepens belief.
Because some sacred places are not built despite the extreme landscape around them. They are built where only a landscape like that can hold their meaning.
Fanjingshan, China.
It begins in mist. Stone rises out of cloud. Stairways cling to the mountain, and far above the forests of Guizhou, two temples appear on separate peaks, as if they had been placed there by vision rather than by hand. Fanjingshan does not reveal itself all at once. It emerges gradually through steep slopes, narrow passages, and sudden glimpses of rock suspended over open space. The higher you climb, the less the mountain feels like scenery, and the more it feels like a world apart. That is where its power comes from. Fanjingshan is the highest peak in the Wuling Range, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and for centuries, one of the sacred mountains of Chinese Buddhism. But its impact is not only historical or religious, it is physical. The jagged stone towers, the steep steps, the shifting fog, the drop below, all of it creates the sense that this is not a place entered casually. It must be approached with effort, and that effort changes the way the place is felt. For outsiders, Fanjingshan can seem almost unreal, like a mountain designed to test the limits of balance and belief at the same time. For generations of worshippers, though, it has meant something more enduring. A sacred destination associated with Maitreya Buddha, a place where spiritual meaning is reached not by convenience, but by ascent. Not by comfort, but by the long discipline of moving upward, one step at a time. After Las Lajas, where faith descends into a gorge, Fanjingshan turns that same impulse toward the sky. The setting changes, but the deeper instinct remains. Human beings have always been drawn to places that seem slightly beyond ordinary reach. Not because they are easy, but because difficulty can give a place weight. At Fanjingshan, belief does not simply happen on the mountain. It rises with it.
Sumela Monastery, Turkey.
The forest comes first. Dark slopes, damp air, and a mountain wall rising above the valley near Trabzon. Then, almost unexpectedly, the monastery appears, not on the cliff, but inside its presence, as if the rock had opened just enough to hold it. From a distance, Sumela seems less like a structure built by human hands than something suspended between stone and silence, held there by will, faith, and sheer improbability. That is what makes the place so powerful. Not only its beauty, but the way it withdraws from the ordinary world. The climb through the wooded slopes creates a slow separation from everyday life below. Step by step, the valley recedes, the air changes, and the monastery begins to feel less like a building and more like a destination of intention. A place that was never meant to be stumbled upon casually. According to tradition, Sumela dates back to the 4th century, and for centuries it remained an important center of Orthodox Christian life. That history matters, because places like this were not chosen simply for their dramatic setting. They were chosen for distance, for refuge, for concentration. The cliff offered protection, but it also offered something harder to find than safety. Silence. A break from distraction. A place where devotion could live at the edge of the world. After Fanjingshan, the spiritual current of this journey continues, but the feeling changes. The exposed stone pinnacles of China give way to forest, shadow, and a sanctuary that seems almost hidden rather than lifted into the sky. Yet the deeper instinct remains the same.
Again and again, people have placed their most meaningful spaces where reaching them requires effort, because some sanctuaries were never meant to stand close at hand. They were meant to stand far enough from the world that the distance itself became part of their meaning.
Socotra, Yemen. The trees are what unsettle you first. They do not look familiar. They do not even seem to belong to the same botanical world as the landscapes most people know. On Socotra, off the coast of Yemen in the northwestern Indian Ocean, dragon's blood trees lift their umbrella-shaped crowns into the dry air like relics from some lost age. Around them lie rocky plateaus, stark mountains, white sand, and a sea that feels less like a border than a form of separation. The island does not look merely remote. It looks self-contained, as if time moved differently here. That sense of estrangement is not an illusion. Socotra is one of the most biologically distinctive island groups on Earth, with an extraordinary number of species found nowhere else. Its long isolation allowed plants, reptiles, and other forms of life to develop in ways that make the landscape feel almost prehistoric. For an outsider, it can resemble another planet. But for the people who live here, this is not fantasy. It is home, shaped by wind, stone, dryness, and a natural world that never had much reason to become familiar to anyone beyond its shores. And that may be what gives Socotra its quiet force. It reminds us that not every extraordinary place becomes remarkable because of what human beings build there. Some places are remarkable because human life had to adapt to a world already strange on its own terms. Here, the drama does not rise from cliffs, stairways, or sanctuaries. It rises from isolation itself, from what happens when land, language, and living things are left long enough to become uniquely their own. After the sacred heights of Sumela, Socotra shifts this journey once again. The focus moves away from devotion carved into the landscape and toward a place where the landscape itself feels almost beyond belief. Nothing here seems designed for spectacle, and yet nearly everything about it startles the eye. Because sometimes the strangest places on Earth are not the ones people made improbable. They are the ones nature kept apart long enough to become unforgettable. Lençóis Maranhenses, Brazil. At first, it looks like a desert. White dunes, wind-shaped ridges, no trees to anchor the eye, and almost nothing to suggest that water belongs here at all. Then the blue appears. Long pools of rainwater settle between the dunes, and the whole landscape begins to feel less like a dry wilderness than a contradiction made visible. In northeastern Brazil, Lençóis Maranhenses seems to break one of the most basic rules we think we understand about terrain. Sand should mean aridity, and yet here, season after season, water gathers and transforms the land into a shifting field of mirrors. That is what makes the place so arresting. Not only its beauty, but its instability. Nothing here feels fixed. The dunes are constantly reshaped by the wind. The lagoons fill during the rainy season and gradually disappear again as the months pass. What seems permanent from a distance turns out to be temporary up close. The entire landscape lives by rhythm rather than solidity. Rain, evaporation, movement, return. For an outsider, it can feel almost impossible, like a visual trick the earth is somehow sustaining. Water in a place that looks like a desert, freshness in the middle of bare sand. But for the people who live within and around this region, the landscape is not a miracle in the abstract. It is a cycle to be understood, anticipated, and lived with. Life here depends not on mastering the terrain, but on reading its changes and adjusting to them. And that may be the deeper meaning of Lençóis Maranhenses.
After Socotra, where isolation created a world that feels biologically strange and ancient, this place shows us another kind of unreality. Not the unreality of separation, but of transformation. Nothing here is exotic because it was cut off from the world. It feels extraordinary because it keeps becoming something else. The land refuses to stay one thing for long enough to be easily defined. That gives the place a quiet, philosophical force. It reminds us that not every extreme landscape is harsh in the same way. Some challenge us through heat, height, or danger. Others challenge the mind more subtly by refusing to match our expectations. Lençóis Maranhenses does exactly that. It turns emptiness into reflection. It turns dryness into illusion. It makes a dune field feel, for a brief season, almost weightless. And perhaps that is why it stays with people. Because here, the world does not simply look beautiful. It looks as though it has changed its mind about what it wants to be.
Hallstatt, Austria. Morning light does much of the work here. It touches the lake first, then the church tower, then the narrow row of houses pressed between dark water and steep mountain walls. And for a moment, Hallstatt can seem almost too composed to be real. Nothing looks excessive, nothing looks accidental. The village sits in such a tight strip of land that it feels less like a place that spread naturally and more like one that had to negotiate every inch of its existence. That tension is part of what makes Hallstatt so memorable. From a distance, it appears serene, almost storybook perfect. But the beauty comes from constraint. The mountain rises directly behind it. The lake closes the space in front. For centuries, people here did not have the luxury of building outward in every direction. Life had to fit the landscape exactly. And over time, that pressure produced something unexpectedly graceful. A settlement shaped not by abundance, but by precision. For outsiders, Hallstatt often feels like an image before it feels like a real town. A postcard, a reflection, a place so visually balanced that it risks seeming unreal. But that surface calm can hide the deeper truth of places like this. Hallstatt was never remarkable only because it was beautiful. It was remarkable because people learned how to live within limits of terrain, of weather, of space, without losing the sense that this could still be home. And that may be its quiet power. After the strange isolation of Socotra and the shifting dreamlike dunes of Lençóis Maranhenses, Hallstatt changes the tone of the journey again. This is not a place that unsettles you through danger or otherworldliness. It unsettles you through harmony, through the strange feeling that a human settlement has fallen into place so completely within the landscape that it almost stops looking inhabited and starts looking imagined. But it is inhabited. It is lived in. And that is what gives it weight. Because sometimes the extraordinary is not found where the world becomes violent or strange. Sometimes it appears where beauty and limitation have learned to live together so perfectly that the result hardly seems possible.
Valparaíso, Chile. Nothing in Valparaíso sits still for very long. The streets rise, twist, break, and begin again. Houses in faded reds, blues, yellows, and greens climb the hills above the Pacific as if the city had been assembled in layers of improvisation, each one refusing to wait for the ground to become easier. Staircases connect one level to the next, funiculars pull themselves up the slopes, and narrow passages open suddenly onto sea light and steep sky. Valparaíso does not unfold in a straight line. It pulls upward, sideways, and outward all at once. That is what gives the city its character. Not order, but tension. Everything here seems shaped by incline, by the constant negotiation between harbor and hillside, between gravity
and daily life. From the outside, that can look chaotic, even fragile. Walls peel, paint fades, angles resist symmetry. And yet the city's identity comes precisely from that lack of smoothness. Valparaíso was never meant to feel polished. It feels lived in, weathered, and continually adjusted to the terrain beneath it. For visitors, the city is often remembered as an image. Murals, stairways, old elevators, bright houses stacked above the bay. But for the people who live there, it is something more demanding than picturesque. It is a place that has learned to exist with steepness, with irregularity, with the sense that nothing about the land was offering an easy plan. The city did not erase those conditions. It absorbed them. And that may be the deeper appeal of Valparaíso. After Hallstatt, where harmony made the settlement feel almost unreal, this place offers a different kind of beauty, one born from friction. Hallstatt feels composed. Valparaíso feels wrestled into being. One seems to rest within its landscape. The other seems to keep negotiating with it day after day, hill after hill. But that is exactly why it belongs in this journey. Because some remarkable places do not become beautiful by overcoming the ground beneath them. They become beautiful by showing every sign of the struggle it took to belong there.
Huacachina, Peru. Then, almost impossibly, the desert opens around water. Palms gather at the edge of a small lagoon. Low buildings rest beneath their shade, and beyond them, the dunes rise in every direction, high, wind-shaped, and constantly in motion. Huacachina does not feel like a town that gradually emerged from its surroundings. It feels like a pause in them, a pocket of life held inside a world of sand. That is what makes the place so striking, not simply the contrast, but the scale of it. The dunes do not sit at a polite distance. They press close, enclosing the settlement almost completely, as if the desert had stopped for a moment and left just enough room for water, trees, and human shelter. The effect is so unlikely that the whole scene can seem like a mirage made permanent. But Huacachina is more than an illusion. For the people who have lived here, this oasis has always meant what oases mean in every hard landscape: relief, orientation, the promise that life can gather even where the wider environment seems determined to erase it. That may be the deeper emotional force of the place. The desert keeps moving, the wind keeps reshaping the dunes, and yet this small center of stillness remains, delicate but enduring. After the steep disorder of Valparaíso, Huacachina changes the rhythm of the journey again. The city's color and motion give way to silence, space, and the strange calm of a settlement that seems surrounded on all sides by instability. Here, the drama is not vertical or architectural. It is elemental: sand, water, heat, and the fragile persistence of life. And perhaps that is why Huacachina lingers in the mind. Because in places like this, survival does not always look like struggle. Sometimes it looks like a small green circle of stillness, held in the middle of an ocean of sand.
Fingal's Cave, Scotland.
You hear this place before you fully see it. Waves move into the cave, strike the dark basalt, and return as a deep, resonant echo that seems larger than the sea itself. On the island of Staffa, Fingal's Cave does not impress first through scale alone, but through sound. Through the strange way stone and water turn the coastline into something almost orchestral. The walls are formed from tall hexagonal basalt columns shaped by ancient volcanic activity with such precision that they can look less geological than architectural, as if the cave had been assembled rather than made. That is what makes Fingal's Cave so unforgettable, not just its form,
but its voice. Many natural wonders overwhelm the eye. This one seems to answer back. As the Atlantic rolls in and out, the cave fills with rhythm, echo, and pressure, and the entire chamber feels alive with repetition. The rock holds the sound, stretches it, and sends it back altered. You are not only looking at a landscape here, you are standing inside an instrument shaped by time. That may be why places like this have always attracted legend. Fingal's Cave is tied to older Gaelic traditions of giants and myth, and that connection feels natural once you are there. The place has the kind of atmosphere that resists plain description. It does not feel man-made, but it does feel staged, as though nature, for once, had become almost too symmetrical, too dramatic, too acoustically precise to be entirely accidental. After Huacachina, where the desert enclosed a small circle of life, this journey moves again into something more elemental. No village, no sanctuary, no visible adaptation to survive here. Only rock, water, and the immense patience of geological time. And yet the effect is no less human, because what we respond to in a place like Fingal's Cave is not usefulness, but awe. It reminds us that some of the most extraordinary places on Earth do not become powerful because people learned to live there. They become powerful because they make us feel, if only for a moment, how large the world was before us.
Mount Roraima, South America. The summit does not look like the top of a mountain. It looks like the surface of another world. Mount Roraima rises from the borderlands of Venezuela, Guyana, and Brazil as a vast table of stone, its cliffs lifting sheer above the surrounding landscape, and its flat summit often sealed off by cloud. From below, it seems almost impossible in shape, too abrupt, too isolated, too self-contained to belong to the softer geography around it. It does not feel like a peak that gradually emerges from the land. It feels cut loose from it. That is what gives Roraima its extraordinary force. Not only its scale, but its separation. This is one of the great tepuis of South America, part of a landscape so old and so geologically distinct that it can seem untouched by ordinary time. Rain, fog, dark rock, and strange plant life combine to create an atmosphere that feels less scenic than primeval. Up there, the world appears reduced to stone, water, silence, and sky. For outsiders, Mount Roraima often feels like pure wonder, a place so remote and visually singular that it borders on the mythical. But for the indigenous traditions of the region, it has long carried deeper meaning. It was never just a dramatic landform. It was a place of spiritual weight, a presence in the landscape rather than merely a feature of it. And that may be why it leaves such a strong impression even now. It does not only look ancient, it feels ancient. After caves, deserts, cliffside sanctuaries, volcanic islands, and settlements pressed against impossible terrain, this journey arrives somewhere larger and quieter than any of them. Mount Roraima does not impress because human beings mastered it. It impresses because it reminds us how much of the earth still seems to stand outside our scale. And perhaps that is the right place to end, because in the end, the most unforgettable landscapes are not always the ones that feel close to human life. Sometimes they are the ones that seem to have belonged to another age, long before we arrived. Some places seem too steep, too remote, too fragile, or too strange to ever become part of ordinary human life. And yet, again and again, they did. Across cliffs, deserts, volcanic islands, mountain sanctuaries, and settlements shaped by stone, we have seen the same quiet truth. Human beings have always found ways to remain. Not because the world made it easy, but because home is not always born from comfort. Sometimes it is born from faith, sometimes from necessity, sometimes from endurance, and sometimes from a bond with a place strong enough to outlast fear. Perhaps that is what these extraordinary places reveal most clearly, that the edges of the habitable world are not only where the land tests us, they are also where the human spirit becomes easiest to see.